All right, recording is started. So hello, welcome to Networking 101. Networking is a thing that SCAD just doesn't tell us about, and it's a really big part of our careers because a lot of kind of getting a job is knowing people, and getting in with those people. So, uh, getting started. There's a lot of different ways to connect with people, both in person and online, and those kind of ways to interact with people has definitely increased post-COVID. And there's a lot of there's more openness to connecting online, especially post-COVID, because hey, you couldn't go out and meet people in person because you risk contracting COVID. Uh, so there are multiple different flavors. So there's in-person events and there's online events and things. But in-person events are mostly conventions and expos. There's Lightbox. There's, if you want to look at smaller ones, there's like SCAD Illustration or Sequa's Mini Comics expos. If you're looking really big, again, there's New York Comic Con. There's like IllexCon. I haven't looked into it, but that's another one. There are networking events at various different places. It's usually just like a social get together. There's like a restaurant in Savannah. I think it's Madame Butterfly who does it, and they have like networking events where sometimes like you get a headshot or you could just talk to different people in different fields. Never gone to one, but I've always kind of been intrigued. Um, and even though networking events aren't specifically tailored necessarily for like illustration or art people, don't actually disregard people in other fields because you never know when someday you might need a call on that person because all connections are worth having. And the more you have, just the more you can kind of dip into that pocket and be like, I have something for this. Or maybe you have a friend who has a lot of connections you could talk to. Um, and there's also, I put lunches on here because a really good way to kind of network with your peers is uh, just taking them out to lunches or dinners, or even just like grabbing a snack or a coffee at a cafe. And, it doesn't have to be strictly work related. You could easily just be like, hey, let's go grab a coffee. Let's find a common interest. Let's exist outside of our usual planar existence in what we do. In terms of online, there's Discord communities, Twitter or X. I'm not really sure what to call it because they've rebranded. Instagram, LinkedIn, ArtStation, and then of course places like SCAD clubs. These are really great places to kind of just dip your toes in because, like, especially in Discord communities, you don't have to be super active, or you could be as active as you want to be in that community. So kind of moving on, a big part of it is just getting your foot name in the door. So you can either take baby steps or you could just Kool-Aid man your way into networking. I'll kind of walk through both sides, or you can choose which side of the spectrum you want to hop in on. Oh, is it still loading? Uh, Hold on. Let me try relaunching it. I don't think it's my Wi-Fi. If that doesn't work, I'll try sharing just my entire screen. Okay. Am I? I'm alright. We good? I'm gonna move on to the next one. So, kind of taking those baby steps is starting with your peers. We all suffer together on a daily basis anyways, so why not take advantage of that suffering? Because hey, we suffer anyways. Um, so not to say take advantage of each other's suffering, but like take advantage of each other's suffering because we're all familiar with each other's work because we see it every day in class. We crit each other every day in class. And so therefore we're more familiar with each other's work than say like kind of just networking with someone online that you may or may not know. Uh, and so it's a good kind of starting point just to hit the ground running because we all know each other in the first place because we kind of have to know each other because we're all sardine together in a classroom. Uh, it's important to kind of, I guess, like, if you're in a rough class, it's really common that if you're having a hard time, chances are at least one other person in that class is having a hard time. Like, my one class is definitely bonded over the fact that we all we're bait and switch with a professor, and this new professor isn't exactly doing a good job with the class, so we're all kind of struggling a little bit. And we've all kind of bonded over that fact. Like we'll ask each other questions and we'll crit each other every day in the Discord we have. And another thing is each person, although you may be in the same track, everyone has their own experiences, their own interests, and we share a lot of commonalities even just outside the classroom. So if you're ever looking for, a peer you want to network with, there's several ways to kind of do that. Um, so kind of you might be sitting there saying interactions are scary, in which case that's fine, but you're not going to get any easier interactions than with someone you see or at least generally sit near on a daily basis. You have to take that leap because if you don't take that leap, that connection's never going to get made. Because, I mean, you might have the rare instance where someone will reach out to you first and then you can kind of reciprocate as you desire. But the only way to truly get a good solid connection is if you're the person who reaches out in the first place. So an example of, oh boy, this was my leap. Tim Kaminsky, he is a art director for Robot Entertainment. It was Wonderstorm at the time he came to kind of visit in the first place. But you know, many years or many quarters ago, I think it was winter or fall 2022, he came to speak at a guest talk. Uh, So it was his talk, Leaving the Comfort Zone, cross training, and it was pretty much a guest talk where he came in and he talked about all these projects he had worked on, including ones that were unreleased because they were mostly just for trying things out. Like, for one, he was learning how to scale a gun properly for an environment and the player character, which taught him a lot. Um, and at the end of the talk, he said, I am open to connections. Please connect with me. And I said, all right, sir, challenge accepted. I actually initially connected with him first on Instagram because he is more active on Instagram. But I also sent him a LinkedIn request with a note because notes are important, especially for guest speakers. Uh, and I sent those both at the same time. He connected with me on LinkedIn a little bit later because he's not as active on there. And I was, it was just really simple. I said, thank you for coming to our talk or coming to talk to us. Really great insight, really appreciated. Thanks. And then that's the only interaction we had for actually a pretty long time. Me wanting to kind of get in his circle or his ring, I actually consistently continued connecting with him on his other platform, and that platform was Instagram, and at the time Patreon, but Instagram was easier because all I had to do was pop up one of his posts. He had a question like in the description bar, and I responded to that question, or I added another question, just to kind of make him notice that I continuously showed up on his feed. And this is only like a small section of actually how much stuff I like messaged him on, because I was there about every post, or every other post at least, messaging him. And he was posting pretty much daily. Another thing important is if they're like on a platform like Instagram. I'm not really familiar with Twitter because Twitter scares me. Threads is a thing. That's like Twitter, I think. But like if they're active on Instagram and are posting a lot of stories, he posted just a random story about cookies he liked, and I was like, "Oh, hey, I have this recipe of cookies that I really like. Let me send it to you." And then we kind of just had a conversation back and forth about cookies because I don't know, it was a quick, easy talking point I had that showed we had a similar interest. Um, so another like important thing to realize is a lot of the big dogs in the industry aren't that different from us. They're all like socially awkward and weird, and they just have a job. Like that's kind of, I mean, they've had more life experience than us, but they're still awkward. They're similar to us. It's just they actually have a job in the industry and usually the art to back it up. Um, but it's important to keep in mind that even if they don't get back to you straight away, it's not anything personal because they are people with very busy lives and a lot of job stuff to do. So they may not get back to you all the time, or if they do get back to you, it may be a week or two later when they finally have the chance to kind of chill out and sit down for a little bit. Uh, so because Tim Kaminsky kind of gave me that nice like foot in the door with him, I finally realized that hey, talking to him doesn't freak me out that much, and so let me now apply that to my peers, which I started doing. So one way to do it is this is Will. If you know Will, I mean you know Will. He's the alum president from last quarter. I always like message him about things. Like I had a project where I was like, I don't know how to line art, homie. Give me tips on line art. Like, does this look good? Help me. And just kind of finding that common thread of connection that you can just push as you talk to someone really helps. Kind of another example of DMs. I know professors are like, hey, know your foundational peers because they all go different places and have different interests. I actually have held on to one of my foundation. It's like my only foundation connection. We both took a 3D design class, and I was like, hey, I'm watching all these fashion videos. Like, it's really cool kind of seeing the process behind everything. And even though I'm not a fashion student, because I had that similar interest, I've been able to talk to him about kind of different fashion things and like patterning and stuff like that. And because I've kept that connection alive, it's easier to contact him. And he's also a peer, so that's an instant in. So another important thing to keep in mind is make sure you're connecting with actual intent to like be friends because a lot of the time people and industry professionals get the feeling when you're just there to kind of make a network connection and not really dive into the meat of a relationship. And so that can actually hurt your connection experience if you're not approaching these people with the proper intent and purpose. So it's important to network to make friends, go places and do things. Again, lunch, dinner, snacks at a cafe. Just find a way to spend time that isn't necessarily in the normal place you'd be, if they can. Just talk to people. If you see someone who's sitting on a bench alone and sad, like be like, "Hey, are you all right?" And I've actually had some really great conversations start from that just because I asked, "Hey, are you okay? Or do you want to talk about it?" And people, even if they don't necessarily say like, "Oh yeah, it's about this," even if they're like, "No, no, I'm good, thank you." Deep down inside, they still appreciate the fact that you took time out of your day to stop and make sure they were okay. And, again, that's another kind of connection point you can start from. Uh, don't be afraid to reach out and find a connection. And for all you know, it could go deep, and become ingrained in your life. So, uh, funnily enough, I am constantly online on Discord, and as some of you may have noticed, I have like the status thing where if I open a game, it mentions that I have a game opened, and it shows like what game it is. And it's something as little as being in the same Discord as someone else with a common interest can change your life. So maybe like a little bit of an aside, but some of my best friends have come from me just playing Destiny 2 and having that Destiny 2 status. And they've been in my life for 3 years now, and we go places and do things, and we hang out all the time, and go to like Comic Cons and stuff together. And that wouldn't have happened if I didn't randomly have that Destiny 2 status on my Discord. Another thing is, this was kind of a quote unquote job. It wasn't paid, but I was in the throes of my painting uh major back when I was a painting major, and I was just doing these Unis Honest works for like 1 hour paintings because you have to do those. You have to do like five per painting, and I just posted them on back at that time. It was my DeviantArt, and I had this person send a message to me, and they're like, "Hey, I'm in this Unis Honest project. You do Unis Honest art. We'd love to have you like submit your stuff for our thing." And what the thing turned out to be is they're trying to get all of these like messages and art entries together into a physical copy, what we're calling a tome, to send actually physically to Mark and Ethan as a thank you for Unis Honest. Uh, and again, another example is Submersed. I never would have worked on Submersed if I, hadn't been sitting next to my illustration friend who was like, man, I'm on this film team that's looking for people that do illustration work. They're looking for viz dev, props, and stuff. And I mean, was I qualified at the time? That's a debatable question, but I had the drive and passion, and I said, yeah, sure, I'll give it a try. And it's been one of the most fulfilling experiences I've had, even more so than I'd say SCAD, because it's taught me so much that isn't actually talked about in SCAD. And had I not said yes to that connection, I would not have met the amazing film team I've worked on. Uh, So moving on, it's important to put yourself out there because again, connections anywhere can open God knows how many doors for you. Um, so these are 10 tips I found for networking. A lot of people say like a little bit of different things depending on who you talk to, but they all kind of boil down to these basic things. So make sure you come with a goal. I mean, if you're just standing next to someone, and you're like, "Hey, how are you doing?" That's also a good thing. But I mean, kind of spin that so you're taking an interest in them because that'll make the conversation a little bit more natural. You're showing that you have an interest in them, and that kind of goes into keeping it balanced. But again, it's important to take the first step. You don't always have to be the one to take the first step, but the only way you can guarantee that you get that connection is if you take that first step. Um, so it's important to have the ability to kind of initiate that first kind of contact with someone. And I mean, you don't have to continue that contact, but as you know, it can start as something as simple as a, "Hey, how you doing?" Don't be negative. I know that might be hard to do because we're all self-deprivating art students, but when you're talking to a stranger, um, a lot of the time, negativity is insecurity disguised, and if you're putting off those vibes, like people pick up on them. Um, and so you want to be positive and you want to kind of focus or try to focus yourself towards those positive aspects of this interaction you're having with someone and as possible as it is to bond over negative things, usually positive bonds are more healthy in the long run. Don't stay with your comfort person. This is more for an in-person event. So this is like if you go to a mixer or like a convention or networking event. A lot of the time, like think of it as like a party. You're gonna just stand around like the few people you know, but if at the same time, if you stand around those same few people you know, you're not really gonna talk to anyone else. So it's kind of important to again take that dive, step out of that kind of comfort zone and go talk to that person across the room, because it's a different person, that widens your kind of breadth of connection abilities. Again, move around, meet others. It's important to kind of not just make the conversation all about you. Try and think of it as you're trying to give them something. As weird as that probably sounds. So like if they're interested in something, like in chat, like I'll always be like, "Oh, I know this person." Go like this is their social. Go say I sent you or whatever. And although it may seem like something that may not be that helpful, a lot of people appreciate it more than you think. And so being able to kind of think about and connect things is a really important skill when it comes to networking. And you might also form a connection that maybe, even though you guys know the same person, that they might not necessarily make that same connection that you make in your brain, if that makes sense. Uh, be curious. The more you kind of inquire about that person and their interests, as long as you like don't do it in like a creepy way, like, "Hey, what do you like?" uh I like this, like, like make sure the conversation is balanced again. um don't make sure they have some talking room and let the conversation kind of evolve naturally, because even though you might want to take it in one certain direction, kind of hold on till there's a break, or if they go off in a different direction, just kind of go off with them. Or if it's something like really really important, like be like, "Hey, can I have this idea," and kind of shoehorn in that. But don't interrupt them if you can avoid it. And make sure that you're allowing them to kind of have a breathing space in the communication you're having back and forth. And if this is probably maybe a little bit hard for the introverts, but make sure you find a fun way to kind of interact with people. If you have to make it like, if you have to gamify it and be like, gee, I have a goal of talking to like 15 people and getting new contacts, then by all means, if that works for you, that works for you. So kind of move on. One quote I really like from a bunch of like TED Talks I've watched is look at it like you're connecting dots. So be that person who finds those connections and brings those connections together. And you might go like you might be sitting there thinking, "Oh, but I don't really know any connections or I don't know how to connect people." In which case, this quote kind of comes in handy too. So everybody knows someone that someone else should know. And that doesn't have to be related in the job sense. Like, I've definitely been like, oh, hey, I know these people who play D2, like my friends. They knew I played D2. I know someone else who plays D2. I've combined the two, and, just kind of mutually benefits everyone. But in the event that you don't know how to connect people, don't worry about it. So this is a quote I really like. Most people will tell you that I am completely useless in 99.99%, or yeah. Oh, wait, this is a little bit weird. Okay, most people will tell you I am completely useless in 99.99% in coffee meetings you have. And I definitely have that feeling. So if it makes anyone feel better, I have like an existential crisis every time I have to do a club talk because I put that pressure on myself because I feel like I need to share a lot of info. And, uh, you know, even though I don't necessarily see the value in connecting everyone I know, just like having you guys all here in chat opens kind of that door of connection because we can all be like, oh, hey, we have a similar interest in networking. What is networking? And stuff like that. So, just another kind of like tip, don't worry about connecting people right away. It's about building that network and that foundational groundwork you have with other people. And then once you have that kind of foundational groundwork and you expand that foundational groundwork across multiple people, that's when you can start saying, oh, hey, I know Jimmy, I know Bob, they would work well together or they are similar interests to each other, and then that's when you connect them. But don't worry about that when you go into connections because it will stress you the hell out. And so sometimes a random shot in the dark can come back and help you. And this is kind of important to think about afterwards. So don't go into something going like, gee, Tim Kaminsky, he's an art director, I want a media in with him, and just kind of network with him in that way. Look at people as people because we are all people with our own experiences that are all valuable in their own ways. And by kind of having different views on things, that can kind of help your connections because, oh, hey, maybe this guy knows a skill or trick this other person doesn't know, and then you can combine them. And then, huzzah, they both learned something, maybe. So kind of my shot in the dark, my first shot in the dark was I was in this psych class and she had an assignment where we had to pretty much contact an industry professional. And I had recently talked to my CAS advisor at the time, who was Roberson, and he was like, "Oh, you're a painting major. You're also interested in illustration. I know this other painting and illustration major alum you can talk to." And as she kind of brought up this assignment, my brain went, oh, hey, I know the perfect guy for this. He's not super terrifying because he's not a giant, like art director for like Disney or something. He just works freelance and he has similar interests. So I just kind of took that dive and I reached out and I messaged him. I said, hey, I have this assignment for my class. If you want to talk to the professor, here's her contact info, but I'm just going to ask you some questions for an interview. Do you have time you could block out for me? Is this something you could do? And he said yes. Um, and the interview went on. It was a great kind of back and forth with him, and he provided a lot of good insights regarding painting and illustration and kind of the practices he has. So I just kind of went on my way after that. Connection went completely cold, and then I did my networking talk back in winter 2022. I went, I need to talk to some industry professionals because I feel like I need to beef up my talk. I need that meat for my talk. And nothing says professional like someone who works in the industry. So even though my connection with him had gone cold, I still reached out to him again because I knew he was receptive to at least emailing him. And crazily enough, even though I don't interact with him that often, like I'll like his stuff and I'll comment on his Instagram occasionally, and like he remembers me. He actually wished me a good luck at this year at SCAD, which was kind of cool because even though you think people may not remember or hold on to those connections, there's still those people who do hold on to that kind of memory and network of connections. And even if you don't keep that connection consistently going, it's still nice to know that there's something you can fall back on if really need be. Um, and again, that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't just like, hey, I'm gonna go talk to this industry professional. A similar example was Tim Kaminsky. Because I consistently kept up my connection with Tim in just like on Instagram, honestly, he actually came and talked to Club, and then later, even though our initial plans for having him come in person fell through, he accepted Art Director Day's invite and then actually came to Club. And we actually gave him this art piece on the left because we felt bad that he went through like 23 students in one day and then had to come to club from 6 to 8. So we wanted to make it worth his time, so we gifted him an art piece that officers all worked on. So kind of segueing in, what do the professionals say? Um, so again, Dane Cousins, he mentions that if you change fields, like say illustration to animation, and you're not going from like VizDev concept art to VizDev concept art, you're gonna have to start over at kind of the bottom rung. Uh, but at the same time, you have other connections you could probably really talk to if you needed. And he said it gets less intimidating each time. Um, with every switch you make. His notes are artists are actually a lot more open to network than we think. They're not these big, scary, untouchable things. They're people like us, and a lot of the time they actually started out like we did. Um, he says conventions are a great place to meet others. This is where I got the IllixCon expo thing. He said it's really good to network for illustration. You can get portfolio reviews, the same stuff. It's important to follow up on new acquaintances online. So he means after kind of that, like after the con or expo has ended, make sure you follow up on like the business cards or the people you've talked to and thank them again for their time, or maybe follow up with another question. Again, it's important to remember everyone's busy, everyone has a life. If they don't respond to you immediately or at all, they're just busy. And, you can follow up with them again, but no one owes you a response because we're all people, we're all busy, we have our own things to take care of. And he also mentions comment on each other's work, which is so important on social media platforms because if you're constantly showing up in someone's feed and show that you like support them, they'll take notice that you show up. Like even every once in a while, they'll notice. So that kind of helps get people in your ring and on your side too. Next is Amelia Rittenbach. She is I think she's actually a Sequa alum. It's illustration or Sequa alum. She actually guest spoke a few quarters ago, but she says it's important to connect with people your peers mention. So if I'm like, hey, I know Bob, he does this, and you maybe have an interest in what Bob does, go ahead and connect with Bob because, mutual connection, mutual interest, bam, connection. And you can always be like, hey, I know this person, and they mention you. Uh, it's okay to randomly connect with others on LinkedIn. I'll actually get into that a little bit more later in the talk because LinkedIn is kind of a funky platform that scares a lot of people, which is totally understandable. Again, message people your friends talk to. There's an example. Make sure you upkeep your connections. If you have to set reminders like, all right, this week I message Bob, next week message Bob, by all means set reminders because you don't want to let connections kind of go cold. It's better if you don't let them go cold. It's important to build a thick skin and confidence because not everyone has time to network, or maybe they're just too busy at that time that you message them initially. So it's important to kind of not take that personally and make sure you're confident in yourself to kind of continue on, and then contact people repeatedly. Next is Chelsea Housen. She is a illustration alum. Artists are people too. You know, we're all people doing things. We all live our lives. It's also important to build friendly and organic relations. Uh, if you're friendly to someone, like kill them with kindness. You know, people will notice if you're like genuinely nice to them. Uh, Again, like and comment on art directors' things. That also works for peers. And if you kind of consistently follow up that stuff, they'll, you know, notice and maybe follow you back on your Instagram or, wherever you're interacting. This is Evon Freeman. So, funny story about this is they were actually in a closed species group I used to frequent before I got into university, and it turns out they actually work in animation, which is super cool. They mentioned networking is just making friends. Going to school, going to a school geared towards the job you want helps because you have like, I don't know, it builds skills that are necessary in the industry. Usually, sometimes you get the knowledge generally. And again, people you suffer with become your network, so make sure you kind of capitalize on those peers that you are suffering with. Think of social media as a public portfolio others can access. Some people have very distinct opinions on this, but don't underestimate social media presence because you'll be surprised where your reach can go. Especially on like Instagram with hashtags. Although I'm not sure if hashtags still work. I heard rumors that hashtags on Instagram like don't work anymore. Keep in contact with recruiters. So this kind of goes with art directors. Recruiters are kind of like the step down, but they're actually the people who kind of go out and look for people to hire. So they are also important if you're trying to get in with a company. Make sure when you apply for a position you want, you send follow-up emails if they don't respond in time. Most will generally not reply, but it's important to keep in mind, hey, you know, if you send out 20 emails and one responds, that's still one response you get, and that's better than, not trying at all. And so these are mostly animation focused, but ask for art tests, because if you can pull off the art test, you show you are good. Um, Depending on the art director, this differs a little bit. Like I know Tim Kaminsky is kind of hesitant with art tests because he's actually failed all the art tests he's taken. So there's definitely kind of a differing opinion that goes on regarding art tests. But network is friends and the people they've worked with. So again, kind of trying to connect people or trying to connect with people your friends know is important. And they actually sent a quote, "The journey is what it is, and try not to stress too hard because it's, you got to take care of yourself. It's important. Self-care, if you don't self-care, then you can't person, if that makes sense." And our test is like it's a studio's way to kind of make sure you have the skills that show up in your work. It differs per studio. Some of them are really predatory. Like, they'll give you an art test and then they won't hire you, but they'll use the work that you did for the art test in stuff. So it's kind of, you have to research the studio to make sure they're like legitimate. And a lot of the times art tests are like super heavy things, but at the same time, if you pull it off, like, damn, you got art chops, homie. That's like the best way I could explain it. I would recommend asking an alum who actually has worked in the industry because they would know better. Next is Theodore Tolis. He is known by Ted Tolis. He's a Greek artist I met via the Unus Annus project I was talking about. And he says, networking is making friends. Be bold and polite when people are talking to you, especially the ones you want to approach. Him being Greek, he actually, English is not his first language, so he mentioned that language barriers are definitely a thing that exist, especially if you're working with studios that are across sea or in a different language. Our school has great networking opportunities. I cannot stress this enough. A lot of the time, I will say you get what you pay for because, like, for example, the university back in my hometown has the biggest firing complex in the US, supposedly, but their students don't go anywhere because they aren't bringing in the connections like SCAD does. So I honestly would say, you get what you pay for when you go to art school. Participate in events in person. This is a sentiment that's kind of shared with a lot of the videos that I linked in my notes, because it's one thing to talk to person like someone online, but it's a whole nother experience when you can like read all their body gestures and their like interactions and stuff with you in person. And it's a feel that isn't replaced by online interactions. And he says, get so good people won't be able to ignore you. Because if you put in the work and you're, really trying and you're like genuine with your interactions, people will take notice in that. So these are kind of sentiments that were not long enough to put on their own thing or were shared through about every other person's thing. So Tim Kaminsky said, be yourself. Because again, people will notice if you're not being genuine. Get that courage and confidence by all of these people. And be friendly, network to make friends. Because those connections are probably going to be the stronger connections you make with other people. Okay, so this is the part where I get a little bit outside my comfort zone because I haven't been to any in-person networking events, but I have one next week and it's Lightbox. So I thought it was important to talk about kind of in-person networking stuff. Oh, my mouse. Okay, so in-person networking events, conventions, expos, trying to think about leave behinds for them. It's a lot to think about. They're a great place to meet like-minded folks because, hey, um, Lightbox is literally like the biggest expo for artists. So there's gonna be a lot of artists there and a lot of art students. Um, so there's gonna be, like even if it's not Lightbox, usually there's like an artist alley or like tabled artists at the event, and it's a really good place to kind of sit and talk to those industry professionals. So big events like that, I know New York Comic Con and Lightbox have them. Smaller ones probably wouldn't, but if they're like a big dog one, they're gonna have mixers or hangout events, and those are usually after hours, like after the expo closes. But you can kind of just sit around, munch on some snacks, and talk to people, and it's kind of a great place to meet other connections in a less hectic situation, because artist alleys are filled to the brim with people who want, merch or prints and stuff. So that's another place you can maybe meet people that's a little bit more low key. Important things to keep in mind are make sure you have business cards. Please do not be me and wait till your junior year to start networking. Uh, some people ask you for them, like even just in passing, and that's a connection immediately because your business card is supposed to have your at least a QR code or something with your socials on it, so people can follow up with you if you really want. Um, Leave behinds are another thing that exists. So these are like postcards, prints, stickers, stuff like that, stuff you can give people. They can get a little bit bulky if you like make like tote bags. It's not going to be easy to stuff like 100 tote bags in your suitcase if you're traveling to an expo. Um, so it's also important to like, I don't know, it's like weigh your options. Do you want to pack a lot of stuff or do you want to just pack like a stack of business cards and have a good conversation? Because that is also equally as valid. So this is a part that's admittedly not as fleshed out as I want it to be, but I did get in contact with our advisor for club because this is like his bread and butter. He literally goes just to talk to people at cons, and SCAD pays him too. So I will actually, when I get an update for that, I will post the notes or the video if it's a video. But these are general tips I was able to kind of find digging through the bowels of YouTube for networking things that weren't like, how to artist alley. So basic takeaways are go talk to artists in person. If they're sitting there, you can kind of just talk up, talk them up, ask them about their process. Another thing to keep in mind though is like be aware of how many people are behind you because you don't want to be like a time hog and hold everyone up. I have heard of various different ways to finesse artists when talking to them, but I don't want to put that info out there without knowing if it's like ethical or good etiquette, so I'll hold off on that. a good practice, at least what we're told in SCAD when guest speakers come, is ask if they are open to connection because not everyone who comes wants a bunch of SCAD students pouring into their DMs. So always be like, hey, I'm this person, maybe juice them up a little bit. Like, hey, I love your work. I've followed you for God knows how many years. Like, I like this, that. Would you like to connect? And then you can hand them a business card or any other leave behind you have with you. You can maybe chat them up a little bit if they're not too busy. But there's that. Again, make sure you follow up on those connections after the event. Um, this is kind of all of these are a little bit more for mixers after this. So talk to people around you. So one of the tips was hang out at like the food court and talk to people who are just kind of standing around. You don't have to be at a food court to do this. Like, if you show up to a mixer early and you just see someone standing there, be like, "Hey, how are you? What do you do?" Stuff like that. If you handshake anyone, make sure it is a nice, firm handshake. Handshake etiquette is something that no one really talks about, but it's kind of important. So it's hard to explain this because we're not in person. But when you go for a handshake, the like, I don't know what to call it, your hand pit where your thumb meets, your thumb and forefinger, make sure hand pits like meet and then give them like a firm squeeze. Like give their hand a firm squeeze. And that is a confident handshake. Don't like constrictor them, like don't just like squeeze the shit out of their hand. Nobody likes when they have the shit squeezed out of their hand. Just like make it firm, but also don't like fishy wiggle weak grab their hand. Like make it intentional. Squeeze that hand. Don't be shy. I was grilled on this by my fiance because I had really weak handshakes and he gave me so much crap for it. Another thing is don't put your hand over someone else's hand when you handshake them. That is actually a sign of dominance and not everyone may like that. I don't think everyone means it as a sign of dominance, but just to be safe, don't do that to people you don't know. So anyways, moving on from that weirdness, don't don't like okay, so when you handshake them, make sure you're friendly. You make eye contact and you smile. Make sure you look like you want to be there and you're actually excited to meet them. Because, you don't want to talk to someone who's like, "Yeah, I'm kind of here just to be here." Like, make sure it has purpose, intention, passion. And people will pick up on that. You don't always have to talk business. Like if you want to talk about like dinosaurs, by all means talk about dinosaurs. And sometimes those other like mutual non-work related connections you make with other people by just liking like D2 again, that can help form a more meaningful connection because it shows you're not just there to talk to them about business and what they know about business. So it kind of delves a little bit deeper into the meat of a relationship. And again, be generally interested in the other person and what they have to say. Don't try and like shoehorn in a bunch of things you want to say. Make sure the conversation is natural and balanced and they get a word in edgewise. And make sure you're not like interrogating them. I know that can be something really easy to do. I mean, if it's a professor, that's kind of what they're paid for. But like someone in artist alley that you don't know, don't be like, "What's your name? What's your SSN? Where did you get your art style?" Stuff like that. Like, make sure it's a natural kind of conversation you have. Um, all right, now for the scary part, LinkedIn. Um, so LinkedIn is something that SCAD kind of has us do, but doesn't really like push it too much. Uh, According to our advisor Atkins, LinkedIn and ArtStation account for 80% of at least hiring for games. I'm not sure if that includes animation, but 80% of industry jobs come from both LinkedIn and ArtStation. So it's kind of important. Yeah, so there we go. It's important if you're in the job market for jobs or an internship because a lot of art directors and recruiters hang out on that. Um, there's less artists that hang out on it. Like I know a bunch of the people I've connected with are like, yeah, I don't have ArtStation, or I don't have an ArtStation or LinkedIn, but I have like an Instagram. Um, So I mean, you could always like connect with them on LinkedIn and be like, "Hey, where else can I find you?" Or, find their links on their LinkedIn or whatever, and follow up with them on their more usual platform. Uh, but feel free to connect with people left and right. Um, Connect with the load of other people. Again, you never know when a different industry might come in use for you. And something that can kind of, I guess, be conflated is just because you have 500 connections doesn't mean they're meaningful connections. If you have people who are like liking your stuff and then sharing it or, whatever, that's I'd rather have 20 people doing that than 500 connections and no one doing that because you're not going to get any visibility. So, uh, different professors will say different things in my experience regarding LinkedIn. But it's like some basic do's and don'ts. So do follow up with professionals and guest speakers if they say it's okay. Don't hunt them down like a creepy stalker, please. That will chase them off more likely. And if you have like a guest speaker that came in, make sure you add a like note. It'll ask you if you want to attach a message to your connection request. Always do that. Make sure you mention like when their talk was, where the talk was, or like something you liked about the talk, and that'll usually make sure you have a higher chance of kind of connecting with them because if it's like Max Boas, who works for DreamWorks and is a really big artist, he's probably going to be like, oh, I don't know this person, deny. Versus if you're like, hey, I loved your talk about DreamWorks and your experience with Kung Fu Panda, and then maybe follow up with a question. He's more likely to accept that than the cold kind of no response thing. It's important to note sometimes you will get like really weird connections or like random connection requests. I always check if they have mutuals with me. So like usually with the connection request it'll be like, "Oh, you have 15 mutuals." And usually if it's at least 3, I'll connect with them or if it's like they're in an industry that is also related to something that's close to what I do, I'll accept it then. Another thing is sometimes if you're connecting with foreign artists, I haven't had this happen with ASCAD students yet, but if you don't have enough connections, LinkedIn will just straight up be like, no, you can't connect with this person until you have more connections. So that was like a really weird thing I had happen with Tio for some reason. Some don'ts don't accept any and all requests that come your way. As tempting as that is, it's kind of more of a headache if you don't check those connections because you'll get like weird messages or weird people in your DMs, or sometimes like it'll be a trickle effect where you accept one random guy you kind of don't know, and then you have like 20 requests from like some people who are connected to them. And it's just easier to kind of only connect with people you know, as kind of weird and backward as that sounds. So again, see how many mutuals you have with each other. Are they interested in anything you're interested in, or is their field adjacent to yours? And I've had some cold connections that were like, oh, hey, this. And I was like, oh, okay, I do know that person. So by just attaching that note, even though we had like no mutuals, helped me kind of figure out like, oh, I know where this person's from. If you do connect with someone that you didn't intend to connect with or want to remove from your network, you can go to their profile, as scary as that is, because it does tell people when you creep on their profile. Go to their profile, you'll see like the message, like the blue message button, and then to the right, it's sometimes 3 dots, sometimes it says more. Kind of just depends. Click that, and then it'll like open this like drop down window, and then you can click remove connection. I've done that a few times because I've had some annoying people add me. Um, so fishy stuff. This is an example of kind of like a fishy connection I had recently. He has 63 like mutual connections, which is why I accepted them, and they're like a Sequa alum, so I was like really weirded out by it. But like looking at this kind of message chain, it definitely like raised some red flags for me. I have not removed them from my network because I'm just lazy, but um I mean, you would be free and fair to completely remove them from your network because understandable. This is another weirdo I connected with. I don't know, sometimes you get some people that seem to think LinkedIn's a dating site. You are also free to remove them from your list. I actually misclicked. I meant to press no, ignore, but I clicked yes, and then he started like asking me really weird personal questions. So I answered them as generally as I could. I mean, I would not recommend it. I would just ghost them or remove them. Again, I only have like three, it's like 200 connections, I think, or something like that. And I've only had this happen like 2 or 3 times. But something I want to say is if they send you any links whatsoever, like quadruple check that link or go to that site if you can, like if it's not like super sketchy, and try and look it up yourself. Because like this guy, he sent me his Instagram link, and I do know there is a phishing link for Instagram going around right now, so I should have not clicked it, but I later checked Instagram just straight up through the app, and it was legit as weird as it was. So again, be very careful with what links you're clicking, where and when. um, if it just feels fishy, don't click the link. And that just helps you keep internet safe. Um, so the nice thing about LinkedIn is it has this like really interesting system where even if you just like something, it'll share it to your entire network and it'll show like at the top bar, it'll be like, oh, this person liked that. Um, you can also back people's skills on it. So like on my page, I have like Viz Dev artist, prop artist, illustration, Photoshop, stuff like that. And then I've had um, fellow students and peers like click it and like endorse my skills. That just makes you look greater, nicer. The more people you have. And you can have people endorse you that were just like in the same class too, because it'll be like, do you work with them? Did you work for them? Were you peers? Was it the same project? Kind of stuff like that. So yeah, peers and classes can endorse your stuff. No one's checking it. Um, Even if a professional isn't necessarily active on it, I still think that connection is important because it's an initial connection. So you could be like, if you go to their other platform, you could be like, oh, hey, we connected on LinkedIn and I just wanted to follow up or something like that. And each person, like a recruiter, could look at your LinkedIn profile and be like, oh, hey, they connected with that artist. I know that artist, and that might help you get in somewhere. Um, Up to you. It does take a little bit because I've had some people where I've connected with them, and it's like I sent a request and like 5 months later they accepted it. But it's that's your decision to make. The other thing that's kind of nice about it is it is kind of like a clean resume. So these are like the quote unquote jobs I've added to it. I need to add something else, but I keep forgetting and I'm lazy. But it's just a nice kind of scrolling list that you can keep up with. And it also shows your entire network, like, oh, hey, uh, Bobby started a job at DreamWorks or something like that. And then people can react and share the post too, which helps with visibility. You don't even have to use it often. Like this is my LinkedIn, and I think my last post was like my digital illustration heaven and hell project from my like I don't even know how many quarters ago that was. But as long as you're liking things and commenting on things and sharing things, it's a really solid platform. And it only goes up from there if you interact on it more. So, too lazy didn't read recap, since that is a lot of info and I apologize. Be friendly, be confident, be consistent. People will realize when you're interacting with these things in mind, and they'll generally appreciate it more. Start with your peers because we all suffer together, so why not just, you know, capitalize on it more. Make sure you build organic relationships. Don't shoehorn or force things because that will be a cold connection really fast. Talk with people, go to lunch, go out there and do things with other people because human interaction is a very important thing. And a lot of us spend a lot of time in a vacuum, and it's important not to because, hey, we're social creatures. Bring people together. Again, you don't have to go into networking with that mindset, but it's always something nice to keep in mind. And don't forget to be genuine, be yourself. Make sure you're putting your best self out there. Um, and yeah. So, anyone want to go grab a coffee? If anyone has any questions, I can also answer those. Sorry, I don't have Discord open on my side screen right now. Mixers can have some weird, like, if it's like endorsed by the convention or expo, like Lightbox has this like after party, just like hors d'oeuvres and drinks mixer. Whereas like the SCAD mixer is evidently only for alums. We'll see if that stays true, but no, I think it's like if you're involved, you can go. Cause Lightbox sent it to me and I'm not tabled or doing anything. But that changes per expo. You'd probably have to research if it's not an email you receive. Uh, the what is Lightbox question? It's like the biggest art expo for artists. There's like DreamWorks, Pixar is showing up, Schoolism is tabled there. There's panels from industry professionals talking about like everything under the art umbrella. Um, there is a concept art presence, like Irie Pan's gonna be there. Uh, it's a big event. Aha! I have it open now on my side screen. And again, I did take a bunch of like talking points from different videos, but those will all be linked in my notes at the bottom. If it's not like there's some links throughout it. So there's that. And again, once I get answers from Atkins about in-person etiquette, I will share those in whatever form they take, because I feel like that's an important thing. Oh, dude, I have been there. So I actually took my Digicom 130 class like late junior year, and I've like rebranded since then a little bit. Like I've overhauled my branding because I just felt like it didn't fit me anymore. But if you can start that early, like I would highly recommend getting on that. And a resume. I have not had a resume since like this quarter I put in my resume. Don't do that to yourself. Get that shit done like as soon as you can. Business cards are, it kind of depends on who you talk to. So some people say they're really outdated, you don't need them. But at the same time, there's also like art people who will ask for them. I've found it just easier to have them because, I mean, you could have that or like a QR code to like a card if you save that somewhere. Um, it's just easier to hand someone something physically than like opposed to them taking photos too, because they'll like, I don't know, maybe they'll pull it out of their cart or pull it out of their jacket one day and be like, oh, I remember that person, I'll network with them or whatever. Also, I mean, I think this goes without saying, but like if you want to connect with me on any of my platforms, by all means connect with me on my platforms. um my card is linked in my Discord bio. Shameless plug. That's another thing you could do is like I'm in a bunch of different artist servers, so you can actually edit your like Discord like profile or whatever. I don't know what to call it. Uh, and you can like put your portfolio link and stuff in there or like a description about you, and that helps people. Like I was talking to an alum and he was like, "Oh yeah, I found your portfolio," and like we kind of had a conversation about that. So that's also something to kind of keep in mind that might be useful every now and again. Yes, y'all are free to go. I will not hold you hostage.